Welcome back from the coffee break. And now, this is when it all comes together in a panel discussion on the future need for this type of program. The panel will be discussing, should Sweden have a new program for Center of Excellence? I have the pleasure of inviting Professor Christina Moberg on stage. She is a professor in organic chemistry at KTH, and she also sits in the board of the Danish National Research Foundation. She will be moderating this panel, and she will also invite her fellow panel members.
Thank you very much and welcome everybody. So I would like to start by asking the panel to come up on the stage. So as you already heard, what we are going to discuss is the question, does Sweden need a new program of Centers for Excellence? And I have a very distinguished panel to discuss this. Reinhilde Veugelers, who you already have met today, professor in managerial economics, strategy and innovation at Catholic University at Leuven. Hans Adolfsson, who is professor of chemistry and Vice-Chancellor of Umeå University. Peter Aronsson, professor of history and Vice-Chancellor of Linnaeus University. And Tobias Krantz, head of policy for education, research and innovation at the Confederation of Swedish enterprise, Svenskt Näringsliv in Swedish, and also former Minister of Higher Education and Research. So I welcome you very much. So I would like to start with you, Reinhilde. You talk very much about excellence. And as you already heard, you have been a member of the previous ERC Scientific Council, and that we also heard that you are a co-author of a study that was requested by the European Parliament Committee on Industry, Research and Energy, called Europe, the Global Centre for Excellent Research, and you quoted from this study a lot here. So you stressed excellence in your talk here, and you also stress excellence in this study. Excellent science and technology capacity is a necessary condition. Research excellence is critical. Scientific research excellence is the sole criteria, etc. So you also mentioned here how you identify excellence. Maybe you can say a little bit more about that in connection to centers of excellence, because what you discussed was in the background of ERC with individual grants. And also, how good are we at identifying the excellence when it comes to excellence centers?
Yeah, these are, of course, all very big questions,
yes.
which I can only contribute partly to answering. If we would have the full answer, that would be really easy. So first of all, I think research excellence is really important because it's really the frontier of research that really pushes the boundaries, and also where most of the applications would actually be from. We also know that industry or any other application of this really comes from the shifting of the frontier, and that's why the excellence really is important. That's not to say that you also need a lot of incremental improvements here, but that these incremental improvements always depend on, do you make the big shifts in the frontier research? So that's why the excellence really matters a lot, and it matters particularly also for supporting, because with the excellence, as we already mentioned, in order to push the frontier, there is way more risk that you need to take, and there is clearly, with if there is too much risk aversion, a risk that particularly that frontier pushing would actually be biased against, and that researchers would spend too much on incremental improvements and avoiding the high risk that pushes the frontier. And that's why I think so excellence definitely needs, it's important, but it also definitely needs extra support here to avoid that that kind of risk-taking is actually not being taken by the researchers. But that, of course, requires that the funder is willing to take that risk here more than that, in order to incentivize the researchers to go into that area here. And that's something that I think we need to be evaluating way more carefully. And that's why I emphasize suggest it's not just only excellence and high gain here, but that you also need to make sure that you certainly in the initial phases of when the research takes place, you're willing to take also enough high risk that is typically associated with getting that frontier shifting here. So for me, excellence is always also taking into account the right level of risk that you need in order to get that kind of excellent shifting here rather than the incremental ones. And that has to be able to measure, but it's very difficult because how do you measure risk taking, particularly ex ante here? So that's very difficult to do. We typically use easy indicators, bibliometric indicators. That's easy for the high gain part. It's way more difficult for the risk one. I've suggested a number of them that we would like the novelty one. But I think any case, any quantitative indicator will be imperfect, and that's why in the end the qualitative evaluation of the proposals and how much risk is there in the proposals has to be done by experts and the qualitative analysis of that. But these experts should then be also able to evaluate the riskiness here and also contingency plans for how to deal with risk. But that also means that they also have to be sufficiently willing to take the risk here. And
which may, of course, lead to failure also. So it can be very difficult to identify. But do you have other criteria which are particularly important for centers of excellences?
So for centers of excellence, I already think that the level of risk that can be taken is much higher than at the individual level, because within the center, you can diversify the risk away here. And that's why I think there should be, there should be a better plan at the level of the centers, how they would mitigate the projects risks for each of the individual projects that they're undertaking, and look really at the complementarity between the projects that are done within the center here, and how that complementarity actually allows for dealing with the risk. And also what I think can be done way better at the center level is also, like you say, so there is failure, but what is failure? If you learn from failure, that will be really also helpful for the next steps of success here. But that requires a lot of spillovers of knowledge from failed projects that others can actually also use here. So the interconnection between the different projects that are combined within the center, the synergies between these projects is a mechanism to see to which extent there is a good strategy for taking risk, but having also a risk contingency plan here. So I would therefore, I think that's also why centers make a lot of sense to have in combination with individual projects here, because at the center level you can take way more risk here, but you can also evaluate that in the proposal in terms of, is there enough risk contingency plans by combining all the different projects.
The monitoring, we will come back to that later, but I would like to ask you now, Hans Adolfsson, could you say something about what the centers have meant for the university, for Umeå University then in your case?
Well, I think they have meant a great deal to the university. Of course, I wasn't there when the centers were started, way back in the 2008, 6 to 8. However, I have seen the impact they've made, and whenever we talk about what kind of research we do at the university, we usually highlight these different areas where we have had centers within. So it's both the Linnaeus Center, the UCMR, which was mentioned earlier today, is certainly one of the areas where we have seen that we made a significant impact, and also within our forestry research that we do together with the Swedish Agricultural University in the Brazili program. It's another area where we certainly see a big impact. So it has meant a lot to the university.
Yeah. Which is not, it's certainly meant a lot to all universities, which is evident from the report, but not for the strategic planning, but it meant for the priorities in Umeå, you mean?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, and also, I mean, the already from the start, the board of the university allocated funding to co-finance the projects, and so they were part of that already from the start.
I would like to ask a little bit more about the co-funding, because all universities are not so fond of that. First of all, of course, it's a way to show the commitment of the universities. At the same time, it limits the freedom of the universities if you are bound to co-finance many centers. So can you mention something about how you see on this?
Well, if you look upon, I mean, we do get a certain amount of block funding, which is going to take care of quite a lot of different things at the university. We need, of course, to take care of salaries for researchers and teachers on that block funding, and also the research infrastructure, which is becoming more and more expensive and more, I would say, a bigger burden on the universities. And at the same time, whenever we go into also co-financing external funding in that sense, it sort of blocks us from doing other kinds of strategic action at the university. And that's why a number of universities these days, especially into the new research bill, put forward that we would like to increase the level of block funding. Because it's definitely, I mean, the balance that we have in Sweden with about, I think it's like around 45 to 55% ratio in between block funding and external funding, if you do it on the average. It doesn't necessarily, I mean, we don't have enough resources for all the things that we would like to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually liked your comment on this, Professor Mlunik. And everybody in the panel did not agree with what you thought here. So I would like to continue with you, Peter Aronsson. You are the Vice-Chancellor of a new university, and only one Vinnova Center was given to one of the new universities, to Karlstad University. So what are your comments about this, and how would you like to structure this kind of centers, for example, in order to get a better chance? And how would this suit your university?
Well, bearing the proud name of Linnaeus University would make me enthusiastic to the excellence centers. Now we are, with Mats Benne's terminology, a rather unkissed beauty from these instruments. I think they are important. I think there is a constant need for this type of tools to gather together the fruits of disciplinary specialization. It goes on with the excellence and goes deeper and become ever more specialized, and you need to bring them together again. And that is happening on all levels in the system, in the faculties, at the universities, and in the national and in the European arena. And that needs to be done. And the trick is, of course, how should it be done? With what kind of dynamics? And how do we need to safeguard the production of excellence, which is disciplinary at the university? And that is exactly what Hans mentioned. There need to be a fair balance to be able to take that kind of responsibility and to act upon these calls. Now, we are, as I said, not apart now, and I don't have a problem with that if that is the best for the knowledge production. But I can't tell that from the investigation now, because we are just evaluating those who have gained money, and we are not evaluating if we have missed some of the talents that we have in the new universities, which are sort of outside this system. We were just discussing here the SFOs. They differ a little bit because they do collect people from other universities, and they are not so close to the host university. So I think that would be a simple way really to address that issue, that it is in the requirement for a good application to show that you have really looked around the country, and globally of course, but starting at home, treating the university system, its state-funded university system, as a whole system, and show that you have really made an effort to find the best people in your country for that, and you have mapped them, and you are ready to collect an excellence center. That, I think, would have enormous positive effects for the country as a whole. So if we would do that and provide us with a sort of basic capacity to act as a university, to take long-term responsibility, I would be very positive to do this. I think, again, it would be important to make a sort of systemic evaluation, and not only from, and then we have more examples, really, of actors in the system. We have the SFOs, we have the KK Foundation. There are several sort of actors, and to know what they are specifically, or thought they should do, need to be done within that context. you were talking of two very different goals for the Excellence Center. One was the winner takes it all. You really need to have a breakthrough for something new. And that I would say, maybe you always need to do that at least on a European level. The other one was to solve complex issues on sustainability, on cohesion, etc. And these need to be close to a complex application. And that might also be done in region. And now large parts of Sweden are a little bit left outside. It's only around the metropolis. And we are doing a great job to contribute to solving issues on sustainability out in the country, which is not connected up to the national system as it should be.
But do you think the criteria should have been different then in the calls?
Well, I'm an historian, but I wouldn't back to change history. Now we have the future. You know, it's an opportunity to change it now.
Yeah, we talk about the next one. Okay, you were very young when this started, of course.
No, I wasn't.
But I mean your university, not you personally. So continue with Tobias Krantz. Of course, transfer of knowledge from universities to society in general, to industry, is of course very important. So for industry's competitiveness, of course. So how do you see these excellent centers? What have they meant anything to society, to industry in Sweden?
Yes, I think they have, and just want to to start with another perspective of this discussion here. That I often think that when we come to these kinds of discussions, it is often portrayed as a fight between excellence and strategy, and you can say basic research and applied research. We always get into that after, maybe directly or maybe after 30 minutes of a debate or something like that. And I think that is a wrong debate. I think that all research should be top quality. We should strive always for to have top quality, and it's not really that interesting exactly where that top research is geographically organized. So I think we should start with that. Say that we in Sweden should have top quality, whatever kind of research we want, or that we try to have in our universities or elsewhere. But I think that well, both in my present position and also in my previous roles, I think that you could say that we've had a development. Well, these programs that we discussed now, but also the SFOs and others, that we can see that we have had more of concentration, more of excellence thinking the last 10, 15, 20 years. And I think that it has been, and you can see that internationally, and I think well, we have had a political discussion about it, but quite many has moved in this direction. And I think it's been good for society, and also think it's been good for the industry. The question here is, should we have more of this in the future? And my answer to that is yes, we should have more of that, but not only when it comes to centers, but also, for example, maybe more excellence thinking when it comes to individuals. When I look, well, if I'm going to be a little bit self-critical now from my time as a politician, I think when we introduced two bills in 2008 and 2012. I wasn't present at the 2012 bill, but the 2008 bill, I was responsible for implementing the bill anyway. And I could say that looking back there, I think that the focus on that bill was too little on excellence, too little on really focusing the money to the best individuals.
So if something went wrong, then it's your fault.
Because, to be honest, if you compare Swedish figures with other countries' figures, we have quite many researchers in Sweden compared to our population. And do we have the results that match this? Well, the jury's out there, but I'm not certain that we are there. So I think that if you look at this from a political reform perspective, and there are some politicians maybe here well, they have spies here, I've heard before. So if the spies listen carefully now, I think they should really try to grasp on this, that well, okay, of course, more money into research, but also think of how those money are distributed, not only among universities, but also among individuals.
Yeah, but if we look then for the benefit of industry, we have different types of centers, the Vinnova centers and the Linnaeus centers, also the strategic commitments of the the present government. So what do you think is benefits most for industry?
Well, I think if we have top research in Sweden, that benefits all industry.
So that's what's most important.
Yes, of course, the quality of overall of Swedish research must be high and must be higher than today. And we can see that I think you mentioned you showed us the figures here before, and you could see that, well, Sweden is quite well doing in many respects, but the distance from Sweden to other countries has diminished, and others are picking up. And you can see also from the industry point of view that the level of investment of Sweden of companies in Swedish research and development has diminished as a share of GDP the last 10 years. 1 percentage point. 1 percentage point, that is quite, you can say that is not so much, but that is 50-60 billion Swedish kronor every year. So that is very that's a huge amount of money. So we have to pick up here, and that has to do with both the public research and also of course the private research.
Yeah, your Danish sister organization, we'll come back to Denmark in a while here. They want to double the funding for basic research in Denmark, or rather for the Danish National Research Council, because they see that benefits industry in the long term, in particular because they have this long-term funding of excellence centers, which also 10 years. So it seems to be also very beneficial for industry in the long term. They can see that they are overrepresented when it comes to, first of all, patent, but also startup companies.
I agree. I think I agree with that as I said before, we shouldn't have this fight between basic research and applied research if you use that terminology, because I think it's a wrong debate. Because all research, even you can say that research can come out from curiosity of a researcher or a research institution, but it also can come out from a specific need from a company or from a other societal innovation, societal institution. But whatever the reason for starting this research is, we should the outcome should be top quality. We could not satisfy with less. So I think that is where we should start. We often start with this fight, basic research, applied research. But at the end of the day, we want to have top research. And of course, I don't think even the most ideological basic research person would say that it's bad if my research comes to use.
Certainly not.
No.
I hope so, Peter.
I think that's what troubles me most, actually, now, that we have too little of debate, public debate. We have some debate within the sector, how to best use the sort of money that we already have. But I would like to see the debate and energy about how much more we need to invest in the knowledge sector. And we don't have that at all. So I would like these figures that you showed on the rise of China and others to put some scare into society, so that they would shout not only for more police and military, but also for more research to make sort of a good development of the country possible. And when we don't have that, it will only be sort of a small irritated debate on should it be more of that or more of that or more of that. We would need a substantial rise, and not only to research, it's also about education. It has been sort of cutting year by year by year, so that we are now having to produce engineers for half the price 20 years ago. And this is the way that research finds its way out in society in its most prominent way. It's through education. We have talked a little bit too little about that. And it's not only about young people, it's lifelong learning. They need to be in contact to make this transition into a new economy with the sort of current staff that we have in the whole economy. So it's a huge question, and I don't find any energy in any political party, and that's scaring me.
But let's come back to the Centers of Excellence. It's true that education is good, and that should go together. But I would anyway like to suggest that now we propose that we will have a new round of excellence centers. So what would we change from the previous ones? So the selection procedure, for example, would it be different? We are going to answer the question in the end here, if we should have any new, because that's the task we have with this debate here. But let's assume that we are going to have new centers. Hans?
Well, one thing to start with is already been mentioned here, and that is the strategic research areas. I mean, when they were coming into business, it was open for collaborations in between universities. It was actually used to have the best scientists from any university to collaborate and to work on specific problems. And I think that could be one step ahead, to really make use of the experts that we have. Already, as you mentioned, Peter, that we need to make use of the best experts that we have, regardless of where they are. And of course, it will be difficult to form a good research environment locally, but it will certainly help if we can really sort of bring the best people together. And again, I mean, quality and excellence will be the criteria to evaluate on anyhow. So.
Tobias, you want to say something?
Yeah. Well, you asked the question about what should we change now if we're going to have this.
For the selection procedure, first of all,
and what criteria and I think that of course one obvious answer from my part is that we should have more of collaboration with industry when we set up these new excellence programs. Don't forget that most researchers in Sweden don't work at universities or research institutions, they work in industry. So that is a potential that I think we don't use enough. And some of them are really, really excellent and really, really high quality. And some of these, specifically some of those, we can all name them, the most important Swedish companies. They are, in fact, quite a lot of research institutions with very long time perspectives. They are taking risks. You mentioned risk taking, that's an important aspect, but that is what successful companies do. They take risks. So that is inherent in their blood, so to speak. So I think that cooperation with business and collaboration with industry would also strengthen these programs. I think also one thing that I recall when I read the reports, I took part of the reports. I wasn't able to be here this morning to hear the presentations, unfortunately, but I read the reports. And I think one interesting aspect of these programs has been that, of course, they have stimulated good research and good, sometimes breakthrough research, but also they have had these very interesting indirect effects on academic leadership, on collaboration, on priorities, and so on. I think that is very, very interesting because I think that if we're going to lift Swedish research at a whole, of course, these things are extremely, extremely important because I think that we should be discussed more. And lastly, but not least, I agree with Peter that we should have this energized debate about, and we have said it in the Confederation of Swedish Enterprise when we put in our proposal for the research bill that is coming this autumn, hopefully. We said that in 10 years we have to move up 1 percentage point when it comes to investments in research and development in Sweden, and 35% of that increase should come from private business. So that is a huge effort that we have to make. This is 50, 60, 70 billion Swedish kronor every year that we have to invest more, and most has to come from business. So that means that we really have to take this overall approach, both in public and private sectors.
Reinhilde.
So on this question, should you change the selection criteria for this program? I think it's really important that it should all be very consistent with what the specific mission is of this instrument. What is this instrument actually trying to address? What is the weakness in the system that you have already existing that this particular instrument is trying to address? And from that should follow what are the selection criteria that we're going to use here. As far as I understood, what's really a very strength of this instrument is the fact that it's big amounts of money for a longer time period that really allows to take more risk from cross-cutting different disciplines to address bigger challenges here. And so that should then also be a very important driver, the extent to which you can actually, with this program, address these. That should also be that will reflect in also more interest from industry, but for that particular risk-taking, that's not to say that industry also cares about access to incremental research and the applications to that, but whether that should also be fitted in this instrument, I don't know. Then you have to have other instruments that would complement. So I think it's really very important to see how this instrument fits within the other instruments of funding here and where it's complementary, and from that should follow its unique characteristics that should then be translated into selection. But I also do think that evaluation is important in the extent to which whatever selection criteria you've put out, that is actually also ex post. If you see the selection is really addressed, and that means by looking at who is not selected as well.
And you certainly need instruments which are complementary also, so not just one type of them. But we have agreed here, I think. You have said that some factors which are important. One is internationalization, one is interdisciplinarity. So are they favored by this type of excellence centers? What is your experience from this, Hans?
Well, the recruitment to Umeå University in the centers that we have had has really been very successful. And I mean, if we look upon especially the international recruitment has been very, very successful. So we have quite a number of international co-workers now that wouldn't have come to the university unless we had that instrument, for sure.
Okay.
So that has certainly meant a lot to us.
And interdisciplinarity.
So can I ask, why would this instrument be making it more easy to attract internet
Well,
compared
money.
to others?
Money, of course. I mean, you have the possibility to recruit people if you get a long-term financing for a specific project. And I mean, the long-term perspective is certainly very, very important in that sense.
Could I also add? First, I think that this kind of action that we are taking now, and you have taken initiative to make sort of an historical evaluation within a group of excellence, I think that's very good and it's helpful. It could be expanded to, as I said, to more, to understand exactly what this instrument should do within the ecosystem that we are working nationally and within Europe. And I think that needs to be done because some things should rather be done on the ERC level or the European level, I think. But it's very good to have that overview. Keeping the long time perspective, I think, is crucial. I would say that for most of this, not too much money is good, because then you need commitment from the universities, and it doesn't become a satellite coming down as its own sort of pseudo-university. I think, as I said before, and you underlined, Hans, that really looking for all the best researchers and to bring them in would be preferred. So that would be a criteria for a good suggestion. I think also, and that I think we might disagree, that I think that there is a need for, I mean, the idea of excellence and quality is a moving target, a moving concept. And I think it has a kernel in the sort of peer-reviewed and disciplinary idea. But as we could see in the evaluation, it moved towards relevance and application. And there are other skills that are needed to take this kind of specialized knowledge, bring them together, see new synergies, new openings in that. And that is not recognized as excellence usually because it's another kind of meta-disciplinary skill. But I think it's more than necessary to be able to move from this disciplinary, in-depth excellence to the application of complex problems. So that needs to be, small by small, be appreciated to take your part in that ecosystem where you move from sort of intradisciplinary excellence to the sort of societal need to meet the agenda issues. It's very big, but necessary.
Do you have a comment to this, Reinhilde?
That's exactly what we also had identified as a problem in the ERC, is the fact that these panels that evaluate, if they are too disciplinary, they will be too narrow. And you need really that broad perspective in your evaluation panel in order to be able to assess the synergies. But that's a big challenge to find enough of these people.
Yes, please.
Well, just to add one more thing, if we look into the criteria here, and something that was part of the already existing criteria as well, and that, which I think has been fundamental to the success, is the freedom to the researchers to really take a different path if it's necessary to do that throughout the program. And I mean, the discovery that was already mentioned by Emmanuel Charpentier on the CRISPR-Cas9 system would never have been able to be done unless there was a freedom to the individual researchers within the program also to look into side tracks along the given path. So that's a very important thing for allowing creativity within research in general, I must say.
That's
And that
why you
needs
need
to
a
be
long
part of
enough
such an
window
instrument.
so that you can
Yeah,
go
exactly.
inside.
Exactly.
And that has evidently been a very important criteria in the Linnaeus centers, at least. I would like also you to comment on another aspect here, and that is young researchers within centers. They can be a very good environment to grow and to have good results in the center. We know that several young scientists have succeeded very well, but it can also be difficult to become independent in a center. What experiences do you have of this? I have seen in different centers. In some centers, they have been able to grow. In some centers, they have just been under the head of the center.
Yeah, I think it's very important that the research environment remains open for new players rather than just only supporting the incumbents. And that's why there should be room for new people to come up with new ideas here. And I think it should be part of the criteria of the center is that itself it's sufficiently open for turbulence and create room for new ideas here. And so empowering young researchers in your center of excellence should be one of the objectives.
Being able to publish independently also.
But sometimes they also do need a bit of sheltered environment initially in order to grow here, because for young people, immediately applying for such centers would be probably also a misser. So in that respect, they need a bit of experience, but not enough so that they can still always go on their own. And that should be part of the criteria of the center, to allow for that own internal turbulence, which is also good for the center itself, I think.
Tobias also wanted to comment on this.
Yes, I think it's a very good question, of course. And now this conference is mostly about the centers of excellence, but of course centers of excellence is not the only financing method we have in the university system, and so of course and well, from my point of view, centers of excellence could contribute to the overall system in certain aspects, but not necessarily in all aspects, and so of course we have to have, for example, all the research councils we have play an important role in giving not only young but also senior researchers the possibility to break out of existing centers or break out of existing frameworks, so to speak, so that they can try innovative research. So I think we have to see that this is and an ideal system is, of course, contain a lot of different financing methods. When I was a research minister, I went to the United States, and as many research ministers do, and of course you can see that there are a lot of different financing methods. You have these basic research block grants, huge amount of money, and you have these extremely competitive financing methods, and all in between. And of course, that is one of the aspects that has made United States so great when it comes to research. So sometimes I think that we should be a little bit more experimental about how different financing methods also in Sweden, although of course we cannot compare since their size and so it's so different. But I think we should be more experimental there.
But in quality, we should be able to compare.
And for example, when I come back from the United States, we had this research committee that I formed, and we put forward a report in 2010. And one of the proposals there was really to form a national program for talented young researchers. And of course, that has been done in different respects since then. But I think that you could take that once more. So that is also a tip for the people from the Minister of Education who has spies here.
The Wallenberg Foundation has done that here in Sweden also.
Exactly.
But just to comment on that, I mean, in the US system, if you come in as a young researcher, getting your first position at the university as an assistant professor, you're also provided by quite a lot of resources from the university.
Yes.
Which is based on the block funding that the universities has. And I mean, we have a situation where we really can't do that all over the whole university in Sweden. And I mean, with increased block funding, that would be a possible way of also funding young researchers. But I think coming back to your question, Christina, is really I mean, if we are serious about creating strong research environments, that is also one part of it, being inclusive, also to let young researchers to develop within that research environment. And I mean, that has to be inclusive in that sense. And I think we go more and more towards that. We have a more, I would say, trustworthy situation now, that we trust young researchers, that we trust people. I mean, I used to be a PhD student in your group, and you put lots of trust in me once, and that has helped me tremendously during my career, actually, to get that head start, to be able to develop on my own as well. So.
But yeah.
So can I just comment, because we've raised this issue of co-funding by the universities or commitment by the universities. I think it's really very important, because that really is the fundamental block for the long-term perspective of many of these centers. But so I'm a bit worried about if it's just block funding that we need to give to the university, because the universities also would have to have the right incentives to go for the risk-taking, high gain, high risk type of research.
Of course.
So part of their part of their incentive should come from how they get actually this type of block funding, so that they know why they should invest in continuing in these, because they will have more funding coming later there too to support that kind of high risk. So it's how you design that block funding is also very important, to make sure you give the right incentives to the institutions to get that long-term.
And in this respect, I think that exchange between universities, between the centers, and monitoring might also be very important. And I will then try to turn a little bit to Denmark, because as we saw here from your slides also, Denmark is doing better when it's measured by the 1% higher cited publications. And I think that this depends on there are several reasons for it, but one reason is the long-term investment in excellence centers from the Danish National Research Councils that started in 1991, and there have been calls for every 2.5 years. So there have been a variety of calls, and there are about 30 centers running all the time in Denmark, and they have better funding than the Swedish centers. And they have the same keywords: trust, freedom, flexibility, long-term good funding. But they also have some others, so that is contact between the different centers. They have retreats for center leaders every year. There are annual meetings where the center leaders and the board and some other people meet. There is also the board visits each center, of members of the board each year, and discuss a specific topic. And that is then collected in a report in the end of the year, and if relevant, provided to the policymakers, politicians in Denmark. That can be, for example, the postdoc challenge, infrastructure, etc. And there is a frequent contact here, both between the different centers and between the board and the centers. And I think that has been part of the success here. I would like to quote Gunnar Ökvist, and he said like this once, or he wrote it: I think that Sweden, Norway, and Finland are more tolerant of mediocre research than in Denmark, who evaluated Nordic research. So how could we improve here? I mean, we could make the centers in a different way, but we could certainly improve in other ways also.
I think Jürgen would not agree with, because
you have some, but no, yes,
heavy-handed interference in the ex-post management of these centers here. I think it's really very important that you select the right ones and then give them the degrees of freedom to operate and evaluate them without too much interference in terms of how they manage here. So I'm also convinced that having regular meetings with them and but connecting them, that would definitely be quite important.
But the meeting are just to support, not to control, just to ask if they need help and support.
Okay, so if you find the right balance there.
Yes, and it's very much appreciated by the centers. Yes. Yes.
Well, I think Denmark is a very interesting example for many reasons. And of course, well, you mentioned one aspect of the reforms, but if you looked at Denmark, they have made reforms within the university system for 20 to 25 years. And I think one of the success stories is that they started really with an analytical work saying that Denmark is a part of a ever-changing global landscape. And we're a small country. We have to do something about it. We have to come together politically and the different organizations, universities and all. And they started, well, in Sweden we got this Globaliseringskommissionen, the Globalization Commission, but Denmark was we were inspired by that, but they did it better. So you can say that they have made a lot of reforms, both when it comes to research and to higher education for 20 years. And almost all the reforms, there have been unanimity between the political parties. So that has been a stability within the system. You may don't like all the reforms, but they have been unanimity and a stable environment for both research and higher education. But there are many different reforms that I think have contributed to the development here. Not only what you mentioned, but also there have been leadership reforms at universities, in the concentration of research funding. You have more evaluation and result-oriented, both when it comes to research and especially when it comes to higher education. So there have been a lot of reforms that I think has made this Danish success. So I think we can learn from Denmark, but in different respects.
Yeah.
So can I ask, because Denmark is so close to Sweden, that you must feel the competition if Denmark would actually do so very well. So is it indeed then also attracting your top Swedish researchers to Denmark? Is that what you feel? Because that would be an ultimate proof of this system is better if the researchers follow the flow.
Yeah, I think we can feel a competition, and I also think, well, you can give the example of the pharmaceutical industry, for example. I think you can see where the success mainly today is, and of course we feel a competition with Denmark there. They're very good at that kind of research and that kind of industry. So of course we feel that. Well, that's one example, of course, but that is one example that I think a lot will think about.
And they have a better krona. It's much stronger, you know. So but I think also it was an interesting observation we had from our Norwegian colleague also to observe that egalitarian culture, which is a distinct difference to Denmark, which is they have a more clear-cut idea of leadership and responsibility where you can go in. And coming to Sweden, it's a completely different setup and Norway. So it's something to work with, and I think it needs to be worked with. So it's about taking responsibility and having the means to do that, both for university leaders and for PIs in these larger projects. But it's a slow process. But you can work also with incitament and making calls and directing sort of the criteria is helping to do that kind of selection.
You have mentioned several factors then that can explain why Denmark has proceeded better than Sweden. But there is one other also. They decreased the number of research institutions. Do we have too many in Sweden? Difficult question, but what do you say?
I think Sweden has a potential. I think we have a high-performing system with not a huge gap. I mean, if you look on an individual level on publication, for example, you find a similar span with Stockholm or my own institution or Kristianstad. It's only that we have much fewer researchers and much fewer crowns, but we do similar publication. Similar publication per crown. So it's not too many in that sense, but I think that we have a good collaborative arena in Sweden. We have similar funding for most of them. Most of them are state bodies. We would have the possibility, I think, to collaborate much more than we are doing because we are now separated as sort of governmental bodies. And that gives, I must answer only for my own institution, you know, and only to make for a civil engineer or for a project, it makes it very complicated. So I think the issue that comes up every 10 years about the legal status of the Swedish university hasn't been dealt with yet, and I think it puts a boundary on how good we are in collaborating and reshaping the landscape.
But I think that depends again on how you incentivate universities. And so again, how you design their funding. If you build in that funding mechanism also any positive effects they would get from connecting with other institutions and playing it, then you build in the system these incentives.
But that needs an active management from the spies.
We don't have the time to solve that problem now, but I think it's an interesting thought if we should merge some universities, if we would do better then. Do you want to comment?
Yes, I must comment on that. And you can't just separate that out in looking only at research. You have to take in the whole picture of what higher educational institutions are doing, and that is also what you were mentioning earlier, the educational part. And I mean, if we're serious about the what we're saying that research and education should go hand in hand, then I mean, we can't really do that separation. But I agree with the fact that we should collaborate more. And maybe we should have less institutions with a strong focus on research, but have much better collaborations in that sense, in order to establish that quality also in the educational side, which is important.
Yeah, now we are approaching the very big questions here, but I think that we need to give the chance for the audience also, if there are some questions.
Otherwise, I couldn't make a comment.
Okay. While somebody raises the hand.
You asked a question, and it's very difficult not to answer it. So,
okay.
I think there where we have too little focus in the Swedish system. But the problem is how we deal with that, and often there is it's every 5 or 10 years there is a discussion about how many universities we should be having, so. And I think often that is the wrong question. I think we should discuss what kind of quality do we want to have in the system, and what kind of output do we want from the system. And I think also that the state should not discuss these how questions so much, but more discuss and answer what kind of output do we want from the system, and make the incentives, right incentives for academic quality, incentives for innovation, and let the institutions in the system work within these boundaries, and a little bit, let's see how it works. So I think if you have that kind of system, we will have more concentration of money, but we will also have more specialized institutions. It might be the old universities, but it might also be new universities that perform very well. So I think we should have a more open, if I use such a market-oriented system, when we have incentives from the states.
But we need to know how to favor the excellence. Yes. Are there any questions from the audience? I don't see any. So then I'll go on to ask you here.
So can I reply to what you were saying? So I fully agree. So we should make sure that you get the right incentives, what's in function of what you actually want. But those incentives should also be carefully enough designed so that the individual institutions are not only accountable for what they do, but also their contribution to the system as well here.
I agree.
Otherwise, you don't incentivize them to collaborate. Yes. And it's not identifying exactly institution X should merge with institution B. It's where are the incentives, and that's what they should figure out from what actually.
Yes, and then combined with the freedom that Peter talks about, they would figure out that themselves, other than the state saying that this university should merge with that one. Better that the universities find out that themselves.
Yes, where are the complementarities, and what are the most natural partners that matter for the objectives that they need to do.
But we need to give some guidelines to the Swedish Research Council. So what changes would you make if we would have a new call?
For this one,
I think we did answer that, didn't we?
Yeah.
But we can repeat.
Did you make notes?
No, not. But you can have more specific changes that we wanted to have.
For me, the most important thing is to mobilize the competencies in the whole university system, so that it would be open to and it would be incentivized to take contacts wherever they are, not only to mobilize the best you can at your university. So the whole system should be utilized. That's the most important thing to me.
Hans?
And also to find a balance in between different financing instruments. I think that's a very key also to success, that to see, as you say, to the whole funding landscape, in fact, and see how can we best put our resources in order for the best possible outcome as well. But again, with excellence and quality, of course, at the very highest level.
Yeah, we have limited resources for research, of course, and we could have long-term funding. We could have individual funding for 10 years, and we could also have the centers. So how to balance between these? We don't have enough for any instrument.
I think, I mean, that's what I've been thinking about here. We get some knowledge input here to make this kind of decision, but it's not a complete map. So really to make an informed decision on answering that, you would need to have some figures, like you are trying to do it for the ERC, and we would need to do that to make the proposition this autumn be well informed. We need to take care of the whole system and not only one part of it, because you can never answer if this should be closed or doubled if you don't place it in that
and context. Probably plurality of different types of instruments.
And we're scientists, so we used to base all our our decisions on data.
Yeah,
And I
only,
mean, we
only.
need data. So.
Oh, yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
And also, so the instruments is not only the Swedish instruments, but also the
course.
yeah.
Well, if I answer
you
the
get
question, I
what
think,
you
of course, I
instruments?
mentioned the collaboration with industry. I think there should be an important aspect. I think you should use the potential that are in some of the fine Swedish companies that really have good researchers and research facilities and research institutions, and they often are at the forefront of what the international development also is. They have a good connection both with universities in other countries and research institutions in other countries, but also, of course, with the global markets. I think that should be also important in this. And then also, I also think that, well, we should not forget about the effect that, well, reading these reports, you can see that the effects that these centers have had when it comes to things like leadership and synergies and how they have affected the system. And that could be done even better, of course, in the future. So maybe that should be even more focused. But because I think if we're going to change the system to be more effective and have better results, I think that is extremely important.
But I think that we can convey the message that the freedom, the trust that we have seen in these centers is something that should continue for the next months also. But then it's said in the program that at the end of the day, we hope to have worked out whether Sweden should have a new program for establishing centers of excellence. I think it's your duty then to say if we should have them or not. Hans?
We have already mentioned so often, what's important is really this long-term perspective. Otherwise, it will have no effect on changing the landscape here. So that's the long term of the funding itself, but also the likelihood that these instruments will continue in the future. If it's just a one-time program, then why would universities be redesigning their strategies if this is just like any other program that can be cancelled? So this long-term perspective is very important to have any long-term impact on changing behavior, which is what you exactly want to do.
With the remarks and addition that we have made, yes, continue. Otherwise, no. That's
okay. But we could also, of course, have the Danish system that we have calls for, say, every second or third year. So we have a continuous system with new centers, which has worked out very well there.
Well, you also have to take into account that if you do it too regularly within the same budget, do you have enough applications to compete with each other? Because you also need a critical scale in order to be picking the right ones too. So finding that right balance.
Another characteristic of the Danish system is also that the universities do not make any selection. So all groups can apply for funding. And the universities just said what you mentioned here, what they offer. And in the future, they are not going to there's no compulsory co-financing from the university, but they tell what they will offer. So everybody can apply. It's not selected by the university. So here it does not be completely bottom up because the universities have also done have a top-down procedure here.
Yeah, but my advice would also be to look again at this block financing and what kind of incentives come from that financing. It's very important here to drive the institutions in the right direction.
Yeah. Hans, you said no to this question if we should have more centers before. Have you changed your mind?
We talked yesterday about what we were going to talk about today, and I said that, I was very skeptical to if we should do another round. But after listening today, I think we could possibly do this because, I mean, it has meant a success on the overall. But again, it has to be put into context. It has to be put into the whole system and look upon what kind of instruments do we need. And I think the long-term perspective that is a key in a program or the programs that we have here in the Centers of Excellence is certainly something which has been a success to the system.
Yeah, that's clear from the evaluation.
Find instruments that are also allowing for the long-term perspectives.
Yeah. So now we have been discussing for 1 hour, so our time is out. So thank you very much for your contributions.
Thank you.
Thank you.